Hello everybody and welcome to tonight's edition of Liberty Action Network TV. I'm your host Doreen Finkel, and tonight our topic is the social and psychological ailments of the economy. And with us today is Dr. Michael Zay. He's a professor at Montclair State University, author of Ageless Nation, correct?
Yes, you have that one, right?
And several other books. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me today.
I want to start with first I want to start with, so much of our show has dealt with dealing with the economy and the fiscal aspect of it. We have never really talked about the social and psychological impact that it has upon a family and individuals and even the community. And I want to start with, let's say, an individual. Suppose an individual is living on a salary, let's say $50,000, okay, and they're accustomed to that. They perhaps bought a house or managed their life around that, and then all of a sudden they're on unemployment. Okay.
Yeah. Well, what is the impact? I mean, we know what the psychological impact is. I mean, so much of what we do in life is related to our occupation, what it is we're contributing to society. We define ourselves in terms of our jobs. It really is, and we've been taught that way. What you do, what you contribute, is who you are. And it could be in the public sphere in terms of working, it could be any number of types of occupations, but we're taught that this is where we get meaning. When you lose a job, it has a tremendous impact on people. We've all gone through this. We have a safety net, so one can go on unemployment. A lot of people don't want to choose that, but that's one of their solutions. So we see people going through this process, and over time it starts to wear on people, because most people can tolerate 3 months, 4 months, 5 months at work. When it starts to turn into 99 weeks, which is now the standard benefits package, and when it starts to go longer and longer, it starts to basically wear on people's sense
this
of
mentality.
Self. Yeah, certainly their mentality.
Self-esteem, maybe.
Right. I just wanted to talk a little bit just about the economy first before we talk about some of these impacts. As you know, the April 2013
jobs report
came out, and there are a few problems with the jobs report. First of all, they claimed that there were 160-something thousand jobs created. As we know, a lot of those are part-time jobs. And in fact, if one looks at the number of part-time, full-time jobs that have been created, we're roughly at the same stage we were in the year 2000. About 115 million people with jobs, full-time jobs. The population has increased by about 35 million. You can see the kind of breach that has taken place, this chasm between the number of people and the number of full-time jobs. And in fact, people have crunched the numbers very quickly. When that report came out on Friday, jubilation, celebration on Wall Street, 15,000, Dow, we've passed this, and everyone's clinking glasses, and everyone's very excited about this, until you start to look at the numbers, and you realize that what they call the full-time equivalent number of jobs, that is the number of full-time jobs plus the part-time jobs, and they have a formula, has actually been going down month by month. And in fact, this ratio, which I will not go into, which is very important, going down for 5 months in a row. According to Forbes magazine, red lights are starting to go off, because this is usually tells us, it portends recession. For a lot of people, the recession has never ended. So I just wanted to put it in context in terms of the number of jobs that we're actually losing, and what was really disturbing, and what we're beginning to see, is the number of hours worked is starting to be reduced. And I think that there's no doubt that is in response to Obamacare. They're trying to get under that magic 30-hour mark so that one would be exempt from all of the rigors of the bureaucracies and the rules and regulations of Obamacare. So you're starting to see that reduce. And people have crunched the numbers, and sure enough, when you look at all the hours worked in April, there were fewer hours worked in the United States than there were, and this is going to the tens of millions of hours worked. So actually, the amount of work that we're doing is disappearing. So this is on top of what is basically a jobs cataclysm over the last 5 years. People have used the term the Great Stagnation.
Right.
I call this year 5 of the Great Stagnation. So I just wanted to put this in the context of the numbers before we start talking about some of the impacts.
The
psychological ones, which no one seems to be discussing at this point. One of the more frightening ones, report came out. It was published in the Wall Street Journal. Got a fairly nice placement, page 6, whatever. Completely ignored by the mainstream media. Suicides amongst boomers moving up.
Right, right.
Moving up since 1999, but they're starting to see this increase since 07, 08.
And these are people like in their 60s or
50s. Yeah,
okay.
actually they looked at the group 35 to 60.
And they have lost their jobs and
yes.
correct at that age, of course, they're unable to get another job.
I mean, if you look at it's kind of interesting. If this was a different type of administration, you would be having, on a nightly basis, a weekly basis, reports on the jobs crisis and the social impacts. And you would have case studies of people who'd lost parents who had committed suicide. This would be part of the
because
common
one
problems.
or somebody lost a job and they can't afford to keep up their lifestyle.
Or they're just depressed about
because
right.
it makes them feel depressed that they can't find a job,
yes.
and their self-esteem goes down. And well, let's talk about that a little bit. So suppose now you have a family, let's say a family of 4, and the main wage earner loses their job, okay, and they're making $100,000,
Yep.
okay, and now see how that affects the family and the children. There's got to be some kind of effect upon the children too.
Right, and one of the impacts that they're looking at, and it's very hard to connect the economy per se. People don't usually leave suicide notes saying the unemployment rate went up. This is why
but they feel as though they can't complete their obligation.
Can't complete their obligation, plus they lose their own sense of meaning within that. And 11% of youth are on some form of antidepressants.
Mm-hmm.
The half of the millennial generation reporting sleeplessness, anxiety. I mean, these are the people who are supposed to be going through their wonder years, right? They're 18 to 20, the 20-somethings supposed to be enjoying themselves. Everyone is feeling the pressure of this economy. And it's not just the boomers who are showing this response via suicide and other types of responses, but you're seeing the stress that is taking place amongst the millennials also. So the millennials reporting restlessness, hopelessness, despair, because they're facing it in a different way. They're looking ahead, and these are the people who are usually the most optimistic, and they're finding that the future is not what they expected it to be. So there's a lot of disappointment taking place. It's not, there are people working and there are people doing well, but eventually it starts to have these kind of subtle impacts on the way that people behave.
And let's go back to the family a minute. Let's say again that wage earner lost their job. Could these people in turn take it out upon their spouse or their children, or how does it reverberate throughout the family?
Well, you always see those types of impacts also. You always see people, the rise in abuse, alcoholism, the use of prescription drugs, off-label, on-label, however they're using them, is on the rise. I mean, when you have a nation that's on antidepressants, you have to start asking questions about the general meaning of life and the general temper of the times. And basically, the temper of the times is very pessimistic. I think there's a lot of people are regressing into themselves. I know this sounds very controversial, but when you see a lot of people just sitting there in a room with their smartphones, communicating with friends who they've never met, it's kind of a sad feeling. There's not that kind of human interaction that's taking place. And I think there's a lot of escapism in society at this point, and I think a lot of it is response to just the belief that they're not going to be able to achieve a meaningful life, at least within the occupational sphere.
Right. of what they're doing, especially right now. So if that has happened, let's say to you, okay, God forbid, would you, and you're younger, okay, you're like 30, would you consider going into a different field?
I think that's what people are thinking about, but then they ask themselves, what field should they be going into? I talk to young people all the time. Professors, so I always quiz people about what they're doing. People are thinking, for instance, about, well, there are a few things that they do think about. First of all, going international. Even though the U.S. economy seems to be stagnating, they're falling behind China, India, and other countries, there still is out there vibrant countries, China, India, Brazil, etc. So if people can think about their careers from a global perspective, which we're really not taught to think about as Americans, we don't even learn other people's languages. I think they would have a better chance of moving ahead. But there's you see, that's the adjustment that has to take place, and people have to start thinking in very different ways about their future.
Right, and so right now, would you say everybody has to at least stick to being fiscally conservative, is the word?
Well,
because you never know what's around the bend.
Well, let me tell you, yes, right, and that's why, right, but what happens then is you get these very poor retail numbers, and then we complain about that because people are not out there buying as much as they would on Black Friday or during the Christmas or the holiday seasons, because they just are not willing. They don't even either have the money or they're not willing to spend the money. I was really shocked. They talk about when you look at purchases that are taking place out there, the number of cars that are actually being purchased in the United States, if you adjusted for population, are so far behind what we were buying, say, in 1986. We're actually buying fewer cars than we were at certain points in the 1980s when the population was much, much smaller. So you see a lot of, the average age of a car in the United States now, average age of the car on the road is about 11 years old. This was against the religion of America. America bought new cars. This is what we did. This is how we defined ourselves. We're also seeing other very strange indicators that no one has even noticed, evidently. The number of miles, throughout our history, certainly since World War II, the number of miles driven by the average American has gone up. America is, we always talk about ourselves as being a nation on the move. And on the move literally means physically moving. That's how we defined ourselves. We moved on the road, we moved across the seas, we eventually moved to the moon. I mean, we physically moved. The actual physical mobility in the United States, on the road at least, has been declining since 2007, 2008. People aren't driving. And no one is even mentioning this. Now, this affects the economy in all sorts of ways. When I'm not on the road, I'm
You don't
not
stop
buying.
to buy, right?
That's right.
You don't buy gas, right? You
And
don't buy
I'm not
anything.
touring, and I'm not going places. The number of people that are visiting national parks, I mean, this was kind of one's patriotic duty to go out there and visit Yosemite, Yellowstone. Those numbers are down by the millions in the last 5 years. So, small indicators, but they tell you a lot about the behavior of Americans. Regressing, standing still, not moving, not driving, and on top of that, all these other psychological indicators.
So, in a sense, you're telling us how something like this affects the communities
Yes.
at large. When you have high numbers of unemployments, how about certain segments of the population, like, for example, the minorities? Does it hit them harder?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the unemployment rate amongst black youth is as high as the unemployment rates in Spain, I mean, which are ridiculous, 25% and higher. Very depressing, and again, less hope for the future, amongst those people.
And so how does this affect their communities, or especially like if they live in an inner city, or their school system? That's another area.
Well, I mean, the question is, the communities are the ones who fiscally usually support schools. So
If there's no money,
the money will come from someplace, but you're not going to have state-of-the-art technologies. And you do see these differentiations between the rich, even within the public school system, between the richer areas that have all of the state-of-the-art technology and the poorer schools, and they might even be attracting better teachers, and it just it just has an impact all the way through. Then the education level isn't as good, less mobility, and less ability to move ahead. So we can see that a thriving economy lifts everyone, one way or another. And when you don't have this, it affects everyone. And that's
negatively, yes.
Negatively, and when you see so many of these indicators, and you keep wondering why this is not being reported, why this is not being discussed. And I think one of the things that makes people even more depressed. I mean, imagine that you are 55 years old, 53 years old, young. Mm-hmm. You have 40 years ahead of you, possibly 35 years ahead of you in terms of actuarial tables, and you're surplused, and you're told that your productivity is no longer needed. Your skills are no longer needed. And millions of people are going through this. What's their response? Well, first of all, they're going to stop spending. They're going to be looking for benefits. We see this dramatic increase in the number of people on food stamps and the number of people on disability. In fact, a lot of people have gone on to disability after their 99 weeks. Suddenly developing disabilities after the 99 weeks on unemployment. And literally, it's very hard once one starts to draw checks like that to change one's viewpoint. And it's very hard to get back into the labor market. It's hard to motivate yourself back in, and it's hard to be accepted back in. And you think of all of this talent, all of this social and human capital that is literally being wasted, that all of this that could contribute to the growth of society now becomes disused. It essentially becomes obsolesced, even though these people have state-of-the-art skills and mental capacities which are sharp, plus all of those years of wisdom and experience that they could be contributing.
Right, and we've seen this before, especially in the Great Depression. I have to bring that one up.
The Great Depression, which, by the way, we didn't really come out of until 1946-47. It wasn't...
It's after the war.
Yes. And in fact, many people, by the way, many economists, as usual, with their great predictive powers, expected us to slip back into the Depression by 1946, because that's the way it was in 1939 and 1940. They just figured we would move back into that same kind of sluggish economy. And in point of fact, by 1950, the United States was producing about half of everything that was being produced in the world. And that's with the beginning of our phenomenal growth, the great growth period from 47 to about 1973.
I see a pattern, though. A lot of those people, when they came back from the war, okay, they went and they had families, and these are the baby boomers, and they probably didn't want their children to suffer all the psychological effects that they went through, so they showered them with gifts and spoiled them and tried to keep them away from that, and now we have a cycle.
Yes, and the problem is that a person who is 60 years old now, being surplused, obsolete, is a person who came through that period, was told that things are good now and they will continue to improve. They were optimistic. I mean, that term optimistic, that things will get better tomorrow and the day after tomorrow will be better than that day. And these people are particularly hard hit because the world really does not make sense to them. Why did everything stop? Why has the entire country just come to essentially a complete halt? And I wanted to make the point that when that person who's in that situation, there are millions and millions of these people, see the jubilation on Wall Street and see the jubilation of people basically celebrating what they consider a boom. Well, there are a few reactions. First of all, people feel very isolated because the first question is, what's wrong with me? Why I must be doing something wrong because the world is moving ahead, not realizing that if the media was absolutely honest about the situation, they would know that they're not isolated cases. They would know that this is basically a general condition out there. So they see certain aspects, certain elements in the population celebrating, which makes them despair even more, because they say, well, if the powers that be believe that things are actually improving, they're going to do less to change the objective conditions that leave me in this position, which then makes them even more depressed. Because there's no hope out there, because no one even is recognizing my problem.
Right, right. So let's turn to some solutions. I was reading about this, and I had saw one that said maybe that we should make legislation that takes into effect the psychological effects of the economy when we're trying to promote social programs. I'm just mentioning it to you.
The real solution is economic growth. It's not a social program. It's not something that will ameliorate what is a worsening economic condition. First and foremost, we have to look at the areas that we can actually, it's interesting. Mitt Romney has been criticized, and I think justifiably so, in terms of how he ran his campaign, etc. But he did bring up some solid points, especially at the beginning of his first debate, where he talked about some of the solutions. And one of them he mentioned was energy. The development of energy, as isolated as it is, the shale projects, the fracking that's taking place in Texas and parts of the Midwest and Far West, those areas are booming. They're just small segments of the economy, but they're booming. And actually, if it wasn't for that sector, we would actually be doing much worse. But if you liberated that, I mean, that alone, it's not the whole solution, but that sector alone I feel would actually basically stimulate the economy, revitalize us in a way. But I mean, that's just part of it. We have to find ways of bringing manufacturing back. There are so many technological breakthroughs taking place. I could name just a few. 3D printing, various forms of robotics. One of the positives that I really believe in, a lot of conservatives take issue with, is high-speed rail. I think a high-speed rail system, if it was developed in the private sector, would move goods and services and people and talent at lightning speeds around the country. And I have to believe that that would help, again, revitalize the economy. I think that's just some of the solutions. They're there. And here's what really worries me, is that given the state of the economy, given the fact that we're printing money capriciously, that we're devaluing the dollar, that we are basically juicing the stock market without helping the economy, at some point we could at least envision some form of a crash. I don't mean just a market crash, but an implosion of the economy. Someone somewhere should have Plan B, you would think, and that's why I think organizations like the Tea Party are really important. I think, first of all, they're kind of like the canary in the coal mine. I mean, they are the ones telling us that there are blinking lights taking place throughout the economy, both sociological, economic, etc., telling us that we have to be careful. Something is happening and it's not positive. But on the other hand, you also have to have a positive vision, and I think the vision is Plan B. What is your escape plan? What do you do if there's a crash? And I see no one talking about this. You would think someone would at least, there are lifeboats on ocean liners. There are, we have life vests.
But remember, the ocean liners had to make a mistake first that cost people their lives.
Right. Yes, I don't want us to be the Titanic of nations. Okay, I don't want us to tip over and hit an iceberg. The problem is, at least the Titanic had an excuse. They didn't see the iceberg. What scares me is we see it. We see it there. We see what's taking place with the debt. We see what's taking place with the implosion in the employment market. But for political reasons and for other reasons, the media refuses to discuss it. The journalists either are not trained to see this. I mean, how come they don't know?
Or we don't have the right people in power.
Or we don't have the right people in power. But you need people who understand what the situation is and have at least a blueprint for moving us ahead. I see blueprints for equalizing society. I see blueprints for all the Band-Aid responses we have, like social programs, unemployment insurance, etc. But none of that tells me how you, I mean, that's easy. You can always come up with a new redistribution plan. That's not hard. You write a law, take money from plate A and put it on plate B. But no one really is talking about how you would actually develop this country and protect us, essentially, from becoming a second-rate economic power.
And is it because the type of government that we have in power is one that's more focused on ideology and redistribution of wealth?
Yes, right. And because a lot of those people have never been in business. There are not people around the president who've been in business. They don't understand how money and wealth is created. They think wealth kind of appears, and then you do something with that wealth after it appears. I mean, think of the kind of bills they pass where they'll suddenly tell automakers, okay, by 2025, 50% of your automobiles have to work on power other than the internal combustion engine. So,
Wow.
how are we supposed to do this? Well, their response is, well, you're a technologist, you're a scientist, do that thing you do that makes new inventions. That's how alienated politicians are from the creative process that creates our wealth and the real economy that exists out there. And I don't see any solutions. The best thing they can do, streamline the government, reduce it to its core, have it defend ourselves, defend the coasts, defend the borders, do what it was set up to do when we wrote the Constitution, and let individual genius of the American people work its will and work its way, because it's there, it's waiting, and it feels overregulated, and eventually the smart
Right.
people are going to start applying their genius somewhere else, and that's what scares me.
Right, and it's already happening, and you're right, and all this stuff you're saying affects those who want to go into small business and grow their own business and focus on stuff that helps the individual.
Yes.
And also, I want to mention education. We should have an educational system that teaches our youngsters from the get-go, about the Constitution and how to become self-reliant and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, we have very smart students who are information poor. I mean, it's that simple. I mean,
Okay.
they just do not receive the information. They might be trained for a particular skill, but in terms of their history and just general geography and where things are, they're not delivered that information.
Okay. Got to cut you, Doc. Thank you very much for coming on our show today, and you're welcome anytime. And I'd like to thank our viewers for watching us. And for more information on our show, go to campusteaparties.com. That's campusteaparties.com. Thank you very much.